My name is Daniela Bas, and I'm the director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development, DISD, in the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA. I'm very pleased that the Malagasy government, in partnership with UNESCO, are holding this first regional conference of African ministers on the implementation of the Kazan Action Plan in Africa. Before moving to what UNDESA does through the division, I would like to give you an overview of the division's mandates, since they are part also of your program. And this program, as I said, is the first regional conference of African ministers on sport, the Kazan Action Plan, and the African Union Sport Policy Framework. So I think it is appropriate to tell you what we do. UNDESA, for the whole UN system, through the Division for Inclusive Social Development, is the focal point on youth, aging, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, cooperatives, and the family. The Division for Inclusive Social Development possesses strong mandates in the areas of social development and the social dimensions of sustainable development. The division's work spans the entire scope of social development progress and implementation, including support to follow-up and implementation to the outcome of the World Summit for Social Development, the Copenhagen Declaration and Programme of Action on Social Development, the World Programme of Action on Youth, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, an outcome document of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the outcome document of the High-Level Meeting on Disability and Development, as well as the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, the objectives of the International Year of the Family, and the International Year of Cooperatives, as well as the third UN Decade for the Eradication of Poverty. So the division also provides primary substantive support to the Commission for Social Development, the second and third committee of the GA, General Assembly, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the Conference of the State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. And recently, it has also the portfolio of Sport for Development and Peace. In fact, over the past 2 years, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, through the Division for Inclusive Social Development, DISD, has been coordinating the UN to the substantive portfolio on sport for development and peace. Since then, UNDESA DISD has been providing support to intergovernmental mechanisms in New York on sport-related discussions. Now, a bit of history on the UN mandate on sport for peace and development. You might recall that the General Assembly first considered sport for development and peace at its 56th session back in 2001, when it decided to consider the item entitled Building a Peaceful and Better World Through Sport and the Olympic Ideal, every 2 years in advance of each summer and winter Olympic Games. The attention of the GA to sport for development and peace was expanded at its 58th session with the inclusion of an item entitled Sport for Peace and Development in its agenda of the session that was held, and it also considered an International Year of Sport and Physical Education. As of its 65th session, the GA gives annual consideration to the issue of sport for development and peace, with alternating biennial resolutions on building a peaceful and better world through sport and the Olympic Ideal, also known as the Olympic Truth Resolution, and the sport as a means to promote education, health, development, and peace. Then last year, in December, during the 73rd session of the General Assembly, Monaco and Tunisia tabled a resolution that was approved, entitled Sport as an Enabler of Sustainable Development, that outlines the expectations of member states regarding the mainstreaming of sport as a platform and enabler of sustainable development, and acceptance of the Kazan Action Plan on Sport as a framework for building this effort, and an expectation of the UN system collaboration for leveraging sport in this manner. The resolution welcomes the growing attention by the international community to exploring and leveraging the role of sport and physical activity in the attainment of development objectives, with the specific mention of the Kazan Action Plan on Sport as endorsed by UNESCO's General Conference and the WHO Global Action Plan on Physical Activity as endorsed by the World Health Assembly. And it encourages member states and the entities of the UN system to draw on these frameworks as appropriate, naturally, and in a coherent and integrated manner in order to advance the consolidation of sport in cross-cutting development and peace strategies. The resolution further calls upon the relevant entities of the UN system to strengthen and systematize interagency collaboration, in line with the updated UN Action Plan as presented in the report of the Secretary General to the General Assembly on strengthening the global framework for leveraging sport for development and peace. And it encourages member states, with the support of the UN system, to explore ways and means to integrate sport into various development objectives in the review and follow-up processes of relevant development frameworks and agendas. In the follow-up to the resolution, the Secretary General is expected to report to the General Assembly 75, that is, next year, on the implementation of the resolution, including a targeted review of the contribution of sport to the 2030 agenda, with attention to the annual themes of the high-level political forum on sustainable development. Therefore, DESA DISD is tasked to prepare this report. As is explained at the very beginning, the Division for Inclusive Social Development considers also sports a vehicle to promote full participation and inclusion of the various social groups the division serves. I repeat, persons with disabilities, youth, older persons, indigenous peoples, and the family. So let me give you an example. DISD serves as a secretariat to the Conference of the State Parties, COSP, to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD. Last June, one of the 3 panels of COSP and many other events rotated around the topic of sport and leisure and creative activities, and one of these was co-organized by the division together with UNESCO. So we picked up Article 30 of CRPD that establishes that persons with disabilities have the right to develop and practice their artistic, creative, and intellectual potential for both individual and societal benefit. So to leave no one behind, the strong social policy frameworks have to be in place to implement rights to access to and use sporting and recreational facilities and arts, to empower peoples of all ages and abilities to play and to participate in recreation, leisure, and sporting activities in public spaces like schools, parks, beaches, playgrounds, and so on. At the same time, the declaration of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development acknowledges sport as an important enabler for sustainable development and peace, promotion of respect and tolerance. Sports for all is a key tool to empower women and young people, individuals and communities, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and so on. It is also a tool to reach health, education, and social inclusive objectives. The 2017 UNESCO Kazan Action Plan is a very important step, moving towards policy convergence for inclusion of persons with disabilities in physical education and sports, as it is the adoption of the General Assembly Resolution A/73/24 of December 2018, as I already mentioned, on sport as an enabler of sustainable development. Member states in the declaration of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development recognized that sports, the arts, and physical activities have the power to change perceptions, prejudices, and behaviors, as well as to inspire people, break down racial and political barriers, combat discrimination, and diffuse conflict. The resolution also recognizes the wide range of benefits of the inclusion of persons with disabilities in sports to individuals, communities, and society at large, and calls for action to be taken to ensure that sports initiatives are inclusive and culture, gender, age, and disability sensitive. The same resolution also recognizes the role that the Paralympic movement plays in showcasing the achievement of athletes with a disability to a global audience and in acting as a primary vehicle to promote positive perceptions and greater inclusion of persons with disabilities in sport and society. In addition to the Kazan Action Plan, the UN has had in place an action plan on sport for development and peace since 2006. In response to the requests and the changing needs of the UN member states, updates of the plan over the years have focused on guiding the efforts at priority setting for international engagement on the use of sport towards development objectives. With the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, the action plan has been reoriented to guide the effective leveraging of sport for development and peace in this context. With the attention to all the innovative ways in which member states, the UN system, and others are using sport to advance peace, empower people, and promote inclusion, the action plan seeks to ensure that none of this work proceeds in a vacuum, but rather continues to grow and evolve with a coherent and integrated approach within and beyond the UN system and its member states. UNDESA is also a member of the steering group on model indicators on sport, physical activity, physical education, and the Sustainable Development Goals, which is led by the Commonwealth Secretariat, which will deliver on Action 2 of the Kazan Action Plan and Action 4 of the UN Action Plan on Sport for Development and Peace. And finally, what I would like to share with you, in 2020, the UN Secretary General will produce a report to the General Assembly on the implementation of the UN Action Plan. We do firmly believe that sport and all types of physical activity has great potential to contribute to achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and to Africa. To paraphrase the words of legendary African activist and politician Nelson Mandela, sport has the power to change the world, inspire and unite people in a way that little else does. It can create hope where once there was only despair. I wish you a successful meeting and look forward to hearing about the outcomes and ways in which UNDESA can support your work in the future. Thank you.